Hello, my name is Erika Starr. My mentor for this research project is Dr. Siobhan Curry. Many thanks to Dr. Curry for her guidance through the process and her reminders to practice self-care, which I'm using in every aspect of my life. I would also like to thank the mentor group for being so supportive during this process, offering resources, offering advice. I found the group method or group mentoring process really beneficial. So for this project, I started off with a big umbrella question. What factors lead to equity in the urban education system? I've had this question in my mind for almost 20 years now. So I am an urban educator. Started off as a teacher, and after about 13 years of teaching, I became a school counselor. I have been at the same building, it's a middle school in St. Louis Public Schools, for almost 20 years now. And what I have seen is that my students are not treated equitably. In fact, they're not just treated inequitably, but they're just treated downright poorly sometimes. Um, After the presentation, if you want, I can share some stories if you would like to hear from the trenches. So, based on that experience, I began this project with a sincere desire to understand what is going on in urban education and why are our children not getting an equitable shot at academic success. The outline for the presentation will flow like this. First, a discussion about equity in education, my research questions about the work of past researchers, what equity factors were determined from that research, my methodology, the results, then conclusions and implications. At the end, we'll have questions and I'll provide my contact information. For YouTube watchers or viewers of this presentation, you'll be able to leave questions in the comment section. So you have all probably seen this image before, but I think it does a great job of illustrating what equity is. And for those who haven't seen this image before, what we see here are, three different people. In the first one, we see it's labeled reality, and we see one individual is way above the rest, has full view and access to the fields. And the second, we see it's labeled equality, and we see they each get the same level of access. In equity, each is given what they need, right? The different levels of supports needed are provided. And the last one, they call this liberation, and this one I've also seen it called justice. They are free of offense and able to go and see the game completely. So equity is the idea that each person has a fair opportunity in life. We all would agree that this is a wonderful concept and should exist, especially for children. But what I see is that education has become the fence in this picture. Students can't reach the field because the fence is in the way. And education should not be the fence. It should be, I don't know, like an escalator. It should be the thing that gets them exactly where they need to go. So how do we measure equity in education? So we're looking at what does it take to be equitable? And this question took me a while to conceptualize. There are so many parts to equity in society, let alone education. In the end, I decided that the ultimate goal of the education system is to graduate students that are prepared for post-secondary education or the job market, whatever the student is interested in doing post-graduation. So graduation rates and entrance into post-secondary work became the measurement of equity for each of the school districts I examined. Over the past 30 years or so, researchers have looked to graduation rates to judge the successfulness of the system. So, I mean, if you were successful in your education and you graduated and can go on to any post-secondary program you would like. I wanted to see if urban school districts are providing equitable systems to their students and what factors do they use to make their system more equitable. My two guiding questions on this path were what factors are each of the districts using to create equity within their system? And are the factors leading to increased post-secondary education? Okay, so I started off by looking at past research on the subject. During the 1990s and the early 2000s, most researchers concluded that what was lacking was number one, teacher motivation. Found that incredibly interesting. And basically, that teachers were not highly motivated. They didn't see their teachers or their students as capable of graduating, and so they weren't motivated to help them graduate. And then a real shift in towards different programs that would help teachers to motivate their students to graduate. So this is a time when education became big business, leading to many other issues within the system. The way money was spent within the district, um, the constant turnover of programs, leading to some burnout for some teachers. During the Obama era, there were still an emphasis on programs, very much so, but researchers were also starting to see that maybe there were issues in society that impacted how a student did in school. They started looking at, what factors were students coming, or what issues were students coming with prior to coming into the building, and could those issues impact education? So today, the focus is not on programs so much, but really about how do you support the individual student toward their academic goals. A lot of emphasis on, if programs, but like wraparound programs. So based on this, I came up with a set of equity factors. So at the district level, of course, we have graduation rates being kind of the umbrella factor. And then to get at that information, I had to look in lots of different areas, but I looked at technology ratios. So does the school provide one-to-one technology? Post-secondary entry percentages, I looked at how is it after students graduate, are they going on to college? Teacher credentials. This information can be a little bit misleading in so much as credentials could be a temporary or provisional certification that the district or the state is providing based on teacher training and programs that the teachers are involved in. And finally, system type, so public, charter, or some kind of hybrid of the two. And just based on past research I've done, and in addition, my own experiences within a public school system, the impact of charter schools, charter systems, impact the ability of a school to provide equity. At the building level, I wanted to see if the school had a full-time student support team. So student support team would be full-time school counselor, full-time social worker, full-time school nurse, full-time family community specialist. So a network of individuals that can help the student with whatever, issues, needs that they might have. Administration, so each school, of course, will have a principal, but will they also have an assistant principal? So, my mind, principal's goal is to help, you know, guide the building, make sure it is growing, make sure that, they're bringing in whatever the student body needs. They're able to work with teachers on growing in their pedagogy and, all those different factors. And so they have to be allowed that time. And so assistant principals help a principal with that. Wraparound programs such as, vision programs, dental programs, providing a food pantry, uniform closet, shoes, all those things that can help a student who, maybe they're acting up in class because they can't see the board and they're struggling to see. And so, some kind of vision program through the school would help with that. Parent organizations, so how involved are parents within the school, and is that connection being made between the school and home? ESOL teachers and classes, so each of these districts had a fairly substantial percentage of students. I don't think anyone was below 5%. I think maybe not Los Angeles, New Orleans had the lowest percentage at 7%, but they all had ELL students. And did they provide ESOL teachers for support? And then finally, college and career readiness programs. And I wanted to see how, each of these systems was supporting students on their pathway to secondary education. So the process that I took was first I identified 4 school districts. The way that I identified the 4 were I looked at their geographic area. So New York was East Coast, Los Angeles was West Coast, New Orleans was South, but I also specifically picked New Orleans because of their use of charter schools, and I wanted to see how that compared to the other districts. And then St. Louis Public as my Midwest school, and I picked St. Louis Public because I have a strong interest and connection to St. Louis Public Schools. So what I did is for each of these school districts, I went on to the district websites, the school websites, the state websites, the national websites, and collected data on all these different equity factors. I put all that data into Microsoft. I created a form in Microsoft Forms to organize the data, and then used it to also create graphs. And so to analyze the data, I used Microsoft Forms and their graphs, and then also Excel. Okay, so the first result that I would like to look at is the overall graduation rates, the post-secondary entrance rates, and state level graduation rates for each of the districts that I examined. So looking at this graph, what you're seeing is in blue, those are the graduation rates for that district. In orange is the post-secondary entrance rate. And then in gray, we see the state graduation rate. And a couple things I would like to point out. First off, we see in Los Angeles, they actually exceed the state average. And so that, to me, that seems like they have reached that equity mark. They are providing an equitable system. The only thing that kind of makes me pause is when we look at their post-secondary programs, and we see a pretty big gap in between, students who graduate and then go on to post-secondary. Jump over here to New York. We see they're fairly close to their state average for graduation, so that's fairly equitable. And we also see that there's less of a discrepancy between their graduation rates and their post-secondary entrance. Moving over here to New Orleans. New Orleans, we can see smallest discrepancy between their graduation rates and their post-secondary rates, but we also see that overall graduation rates for the state are pretty low, and then they also have the lowest number of students that are graduating. And then now we jump over to St. Louis, and we see a lot of discrepancy here. We see the overall state average over the national average for, graduation. And then we see a pretty large discrepancy between the graduation rates for St. Louis Public and the state. And then we also see a huge gap here. So students are graduating at higher percentages, but they have the lowest number of students entering into post-secondary work. The next set of results, I looked at district size. I wanted to see how they're accommodating students at the building level. And we can see the largest discrepancy in New York. So New York has over 1 million students. They have about 2,000 buildings. And so per building, they're at like 800 or 900 per building. We see same kind of situation here in Los Angeles, same kind of situation, not as much, but similar situation in New Orleans. But St. Louis Public had the best ratio for building to student. I think it averaged about 200 or so per building. So I thought that was really good. I looked at the system types. So 2 districts, New York and St. Louis, had a hybrid, and which meant they had public run or like public governed schools by like a school board, and they also have charter schools that have some direction from the school board but are still on their own charter. And these New York and St. Louis had similar ratios of public to charter, which is a pretty small ratio. Now, knowing St. Louis, we have many, 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 many charter schools, but they're just not involved in the public school system. Looking at New Orleans, there are, for all intents and purposes, 100% charter schools. Now, they are now trying to come together. They just now changed their website within the last year. And then that data on that website is given for NOLA public schools. They call it NOLA public schools, or New Orleans, Louisiana public schools. But at the state level, that data is all separate still. They haven't brought it all together into one district, one set of data for all the different schools. And then Los Angeles is the only one that's completely public. Now, they have charter schools in Los Angeles. I looked that up. They have a number of charter schools in Los Angeles, but they're not part of the public school system. Okay, percentages of certified teachers. So the idea is how trained are teachers. Now, St. Louis and Los Angeles report 100%. Knowing the reality, though, probably much less than that if you consider full certification versus, partial or provisional certification. So New York and New Orleans have lower numbers. New Orleans had the lowest number. I think they were at like 45% of fully certified staff. So technology ratios, of course, are incredibly important. Thank you to the pandemic. Most of our urban schools now have one-to-one technology. I don't think we're going to quite see the benefit of that for a few more years, but at this point, New York, St. Louis, Los Angeles, all reporting 100%. Whereas New Orleans, they did not have that data available. And even looking at the at individual charter schools, that information wasn't provided. So then I looked at the building level. And so my process for this was to just do a Google search of, New York City public schools, high school, for example. And the first school that came up that I knew was part of that system, I clicked on, and that was my school that I did I used as a case study. So then I went through each of their websites, clicked on every link, and came up with what was their main equity factor at the building level. And what I saw was at each of these schools, they had something that kind of set them apart. So at Midwood High School, at Brooklyn College, they have a large student support team. So that included 17 school counselors, 4 social workers, and 11 assistant principals. And I went through that list to see if there's any duplicates, and there weren't. That literally was their staff, which is incredible. I mean, you would have to have thousands of students, to kind of understand that equity ratio, or that ratio of student support, which leads me to believe that that is their main equity factor, is that they intentionally created a large student support team for their students. At Los Angeles High School, they had a strong parent organization. They had a number of parent organizations. Starting off, they had the website, each link on the website had a Spanish and English version. So I'm taking this to mean that a lot of their students and families speak Spanish. And so this was a way to help involve families and community into the school. And so they even had a board, like an advocacy board. And so, parents were on the advocacy board, and they would meet to discuss what parents thought needed to happen at the high school. And next is Benjamin Franklin High School. This is part of New Orleans. For this high school, they did give a lot of data, whereas the other high schools didn't give a whole lot of data on their sites, but they did. They said they had 100% graduation rate and 100% post-secondary entrance. They didn't offer, evidence of that data, but if I'm taking it at face value, I would say probably their dual enrollment with the University of New Orleans would help to, make this happen. So, they have that connection there. I think Benjamin Franklin is also a kind of like a magnet school that focuses on gifted students. There's an entrance exam to get into the school, which is why I'm kind of they don't say that on their website, but that's the conclusion I'm making, since they have an entrance exam to get into high school. The last one is Gateway STEM High School, and they have really strong wraparound in college readiness programs and partnerships. There had to be at least 25 listed on the website. And so, they offered vision, dental, connections with UMSL, St. Louis University. They offered lots of tutoring programs, just a marvelous set of wraparound services. the only factor or the only concern I had was that listed on the website, they only had one person in charge of all of it. And so just knowing the reality of how schools are and working with partners in a school, that would be really difficult to keep up with all those partnerships. And so I'm not sure how active each one of those partnerships is, just because that would be a lot on one person to manage. So my conclusions are that New York and Los Angeles seem to have the most equitable systems. They get to this through using strong parent support and strong student support teams. And these different factors, there's these two equity factors, help to support individual students and their needs. So they're drilling down to the individual student more. So based on all the research and all the factors or everything that I saw, there are three factors that stand out. Number one, strong community connections are important, as we saw in Los Angeles. So when parents have a strong connection, students are more successful. Two, increased student support teams, as was seen at Midwood High School at Brooklyn College. They had the 17 school counselors, the 4 social workers, and 11 assistant principals. So it would seem that students have easy access to a support network that will help them get to the next level. In addition, with that many staff members, they could really focus on each individual student. Finally, based on previous research, there is a real issue, not just previous research, I should say, also including the research that I did for this project. There is a real issue with the perception of urban education. I often found that the discussion was on dropout rates rather than graduation rates. Um, I've seen a real negative bias towards urban education among researchers, not just public perception, not just, what the parents of who live in the city think, or the teachers or administrators that work in the system. It's not their perceptions, it's researchers and their perceptions of urban education. So I'm guilty that I have a bias, a very positive bias about urban education, because I see that what students, the skill set that students come to the table with. So, all of our students come to the table with a certain skill set. So, maybe in the suburban areas, they come with a skill set such as, parents who have higher level degrees. They may have a master's or a doctorate. Their parents have more resources, time, energy, financial resources to, you know, give more opportunities to their children. And that set of skills and that set of skills has been highly prized in education. Um, but I don't think that that is the only set of skills that is necessary for the future workplace. Students that come to an urban public school are more adaptable, they're more inclusive, they're driven toward real world application of concept, they're resilient, they're perceptive, and they are authentic. And I think that, and where I'm getting this evidence from is my experiences with students and a pushback to what I've seen in the research of what I see them saying about my students and what I see in my students. Um, and so that skill set that they come to school with, I think will better prepare them for um, the future, more so than they would in any other setting. If you have any questions about this presentation, you can write questions in the comments section, and I will answer them. Um, Thank you for listening to this presentation. Again, my name is Erika Starr. Thank you so much to my mentor, Dr. Siobhan Curry, and here is my email address if you want to reach out to me. And then finally, here is the bibliography. These are my research studies, and these are the websites that I used. Thank you very much.